There are too many commonalities now. Again, I can't say evil Bigfoot, good Bigfoot. But, what I do know is it's an entity, and holy entities, they don't interact with us.
Welcome to A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, an audio experience dedicated to the further exploration of Bigfoot and the people Bigfoot has revealed itself to. What started with a documentary of eyewitness testimony and expert analysis has now led the film's crew deeper down the path to follow up with those whose lives are forever changed by this cloaked reality. Tune in weekly to join me, your host, Tobe Johnson, and my co-host, Jill Remensnyder, as we go back into the trees to sit down once more with our guest in search of the truth, no matter how strange. Jill Remensnyder, hello.
Hey, Tobe, how's it going?
Well, it's going pretty good. I am just my mind's a little bit melted here from our interview we just did with Eira Wulfnothsson from A Flash Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot, and Eira is an ex-occultist. She's looked into what she would call the mystery schools pretty much her whole life, and now she's a Roman Catholic. So these are big bursts of differences, and we're talking about Bigfoot somehow in the middle of all this. What did you think?
I thought it was a great conversation, and I think she's the perfect person to have these conversations with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some surprising things that were brought up along the way. I think people will be surprised on what some previous witnesses have said and things that she's bringing up too. She's not a Bigfoot researcher. In fact, she's not really even a fan of the subject matter. Um, but yet, because of the fact that she's an ex-occultist, she looks at it through that lens and is trying to help the audience understand what the difference is between some of the things that maybe say like the like of myself or Arla or Barb Shoop would say. There's a whole different perspective here, and one that probably will be controversial.
It's a voice, yes, and yes, but
Yes,
it's a necessary voice in the conversation. So
it is.
I think it's so important. One thing I'll say this, Tobe, getting into this subject, the more I learn, the more I hear, the more I realize I have no idea what's going on.
Right.
And I just have more questions. So I think Ira's experience and her point of view is just another resource that people can draw from,
Mhm.
keep in consideration. Kind of like Arla says, don't throw it away, file it away. Because who knows? You might want to lean on this information in the future sometime.
Yeah, and when I say controversial, I think that's a good thing because you can't just drink all the Kool-Aid all the time that what we're talking about here is Harry the Henderson. It's far too reverent. And I go back to the quote that is at the beginning of the documentary where TJ Ravenwolf says, "Forgive us for speaking so plainly." And you can see us go down that road, that what we're going to be talking about is something much deeper than footprints. And for that, there may be some difference of opinion about what this is with the audience. I myself am pretty neutral, believe it or not, about the nature of the beast, because there seems to be something going on here that is so mysterious that it wants it that way forever. And that to me is just, it's unlike anything in the physical realm. So we talk about that with Eira Wulfnothsson. I think people will be very interested in the news that is going to be breaking here. So without further ado, should we do it, Jill?
Let's do it.
All right, our interview coming up here with Eira Wulfnothsson. All right, with us right now is Eira Wulfnothsson from A Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot. Hello, Eira.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show here, Ira. And everybody that has seen A Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot remembers your scene in particular because you get into kind of the mysteries of the phenomena surrounding Sasquatch. Not so much the Bigfoot issue, but what I would call the peripheral issues. And you have a history of looking at these mysteries from, years back. So tell people a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, most of you met me at a time around 2015. I did two Bigfoot conferences, but I spoke on power spots. Bigfoot was never a focus for me. I wasn't a Bigfoot researcher, I wasn't a Bigfoot fan. So, I came and spoke on power spots, which are places where, when it comes to the preternatural and the supernatural, everything but the kitchen sink happens there. In ancient times, power spots were very special because that is where the first magica was performed. So before I go off in a big history of why that is, just know that within power places, of which I studied, that's where everything paranormal takes place at a higher degree of interaction. Um, a lot of people are starting to pick up on this over the last 5 years. In my earlier life, before everyone came to know me as a woman that sort of hung out in the forest and spent all her time in the wilderness with animals and um, spiritual entities of the invisible realms, what a lot of people don't know is I had a background that I was very ashamed of. Now, I'm 65. I grew up in a Luciferian family. Um, I educated in two mystery schools early on, and I'm not talking about the internet kind. This was when we met in person. This was the 70s, the 80s in the Bay Area. I was taken to Bohemian Grove at age 3. You all know or probably heard that when Toby has interviewed me in the past. But I studied many, many different disciplines: the trivium, the quadrivium, Hermetic philosophy, alchemistic philosophy. I was a member of the International Alchemy Guild. I practiced ceremonial magic, ritual magic, Golden Dawn magic. I invoked, evoked, convoked entities my entire life. It was my upbringing, and that's not something that you go on a date or you go to visit a friend's house and say, "Hi, I'm a Luciferian. I was born into a Luciferian family." So when my 50s came around, I wanted to return to nature and just disappear. And that's when everyone met me. Now, as a child, up until age 13, I spent every summer on the Hoopa Reservation. So I had another aspect of my family on my father's side that was very close to an indigenous native First Nations type background. I am not going to go into how much I love that. Um, but I will say that I was told a lot about Bigfoot growing up. But it wasn't until I was in my 50s, when I was out researching the power spots, that I had an encounter with Bigfoot. And, I had never seen a Bigfoot, but I had always felt something was watching me. And I attributed that to the many different degrees of entities I had worked with and experienced in my lifetime. My life story of the things I've experienced is ludicrous. To tell my story is ridiculous. Because I had hidden my past for so long, I just, I'm not very credible. So I had this experience. I had been photographing the archaeology. I had a very advanced tri-field meter back then. It was made at Princeton and sent to me to research this site and photograph the archaeology at the same time. And I had a camera. I had a cell phone, and I was coming out through the last rock wall with my two pit bulls. And I turned to my right, and standing in the middle of a ravine was a classic Bigfoot, big dome head, reddish hair. The face was like my skin, but the face was hairy, and it was staring at me. At that very moment, all I could think of repeating in my head, you're hot, you're tired, you just want to go home. You're hot, you're tired, you just want to go home. You're hot, you're tired, you just want to go home. I look at my dogs and they're marching slowly in front of me. You're hot, you're tired, you just want to go home. Tails down, do, 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 do. So I get home and I have absolutely zero memory of this experience. None. But that night, I remember clearly my dogs didn't want to go outside. They were frightened of something. I don't know if it was a week later or a few days later. I don't remember because I really don't focus on Bigfoot stuff. So I sort of chalked it back in the back of my mind. But a friend of mine called who was a huge Bigfoot fan, Melody. And she was talking about Bigfoot. And suddenly this huge memory came back, clear as a bell. And I'm jumping up out of my chair saying, oh my gosh, I saw a Bigfoot. I can't believe it. I can't. And I said a swear word, believe it. I was so mad because something, a supernatural entity, which is what I believe it is, had really violated my free will, wiped out my memory. And then after that, everybody would say, well, they're protecting themselves. They're defending themselves from your dogs. This is something that had watched me for probably years. It knew I wasn't a threat. It knew me well. It knew my dogs well. I have other experiences where my dogs would be out in the land, and this was on about 4,000 acres of 2 different ranches, privately owned, no human beings out there but me, nothing but animal trails. I was going up and down rattlesnake infested in the summer hills. This thing knew everything about me, and yet it felt compelled, a 1,000-pound hulking creature, to wipe my memory out that I was, and just go home. You're hot, you're tired, and you're just going to go home. No, I was mad at this thing. And I think the next time I went out, I said, what the heck do you think you're doing? My dog, you could just boom, and the dog would be like skull crushed and thrown 20 miles into the air. Me too. So I hear these stories from people about, well, they're just so lovely and they're so wonderful. And I just want to see them again. Ask me about why I think that's really weird and what I think that's attributed to. I have no problem with people, loving what they do and going into the forest. But for me, I didn't like the idea that this creature could violate my free will so casually, so carelessly. I was no threat to anyone.
So really, Ira, from the get, you had your suspicion that this was
Yeah.
something other. This was a nefarious thing. What you're describing, saying that it violated your free will, some people would attribute to mind speak or infrasound pushing you
I know.
back. But you feel as though this thing violated your free will. Go into that a little bit more and what that may be attached to.
I have no explanation for why any creature, by definition, in God's creation, we are all creatures. Angels are creatures, Bigfoot are creatures, we're creatures, our dogs are creatures. I have no explanation for a creature um, that is allegedly high intelligence, which I do agree with that. I do agree they are very high intelligence. I cannot explain anything but something that is not I felt like it was messing with me, toying with me. And that to me, gosh, I I swore I would not come on a podcast where everyone enjoyed and loved Bigfoot and say what I'm going to say, but to me, the entities that I interacted with the first 4 decades of my life were fallen angels and demons, and they had very specific characteristics and faculties that they were capable of. They're exactly the same faculties and characteristics that I see with some of the entities that people are interacting with now. Now, a lot of people will say Bigfoot is flesh and blood. Well, maybe there is another creature out there that's flesh and blood. I don't know. I have
Mhm.
no answer for that, no argument for it. But to think that there is something that can be your best friend and then at the same time hide and sneak and toy with you and touch you. And, I ask people all the time, when you see these creatures, how do you know they're flesh and blood? Have you ever walked up to one and hugged it? When you see these footprints, and this is the biggest piece of evidence for me, when you see these footprints and they go 20 yards and then just poof, dematerialize into another dimension. I mean, I mean, you can't call that cloaking. That's dematerialization. That's bleeding in and out of another reality. This is not something that's unfamiliar to me. I've seen things dematerialize, and these beings are attached to that. Both the diabolic by definition, by ancient mythology, but also with Bigfoot. I was sitting on a rock out in this same location one day, and this was 8 years of this thing interacting, perhaps. And I filled my dog's water bowl and I started to eat my sandwich, finished my sandwich, put it back in my pack, looked down to get the water bowl at my feet, hadn't moved, hadn't passed out, hadn't fallen off the rock, and the water bowl was absolutely gone. It had disappeared. It was a metal bowl filled with a half a gallon of water in it because I had 200-pound dogs. My dogs would disappear and come back without collars. There were no people. They were very expensive, beaded, beautiful collars. That one's probably more in the realm of I don't know, but the water bowl was right in front of me. Now, in Magica, we see this all the time. This is something it happens, just like you hear about metal bending. It happens. It's not a ruse. It's not a charlatan trick. Temperatures can rise 20 degrees in a room just from consciousness. So these Bigfoot are capable of doing these things, throwing their voices to another place. Um, when they seem to come into reality, people report from a portal. What we hear with ceremonial magic when we are evoking something, not invoking into us, but evoking, you'll hear a sound like a gun firing, a pop. Very familiar. You see it in your reports as well.
Wait, now
So,
pause that right there. I want to pause that. What Go into depth here about these sounds here because this part's really fascinating for me because we heard these sounds and they are so abrupt and so startling given the location when you're saying 4,000 acres of absolute wilderness and you hear a car door slam or a gunfire. What is happening with all the research you've looked at as far as temporally portal opening, closing? What are we looking at here that would cause this shift?
it's the opening of another dimension. And this is the entities are outside of Chronos, outside of space and time. They're coming into our time, Chronos. So they're in the avium, they're outside of that. But when they manifest here,
Mhm.
there is some sort of reaction that is well known in occult circles. I'm not talking about Wiccans and pagans and people out in the forest, and I'm talking about disciplines that are high functioning occultists. And when you're evoking or convoking, there is that pop that happens outside of the circle. Now, it takes two, according to the mythology that I know. It takes our consciousness as well as theirs. I don't know if that's true. You also have to remember today, I am a Roman Catholic. I am no longer an occultist. So I'm also speaking from classical angelology
Mhm.
and demonology, but within the occult circles that I studied with, within the mystery schools, it's very similar to the same teachings and wisdoms. that I now endorse as a Roman Catholic. The angelology and demonology. What are the origins? Classically, by definition, a demon is not a fallen angel. A demon is the dead spirit of a Nephilim, a demigod, half human, half angelic. In Genesis 6, if you want to go back and look at this, the fallen 200, led by Azazel and Shemzaza and 18 others, came down on Mount Hermon and went into the daughters of men and had children with them. They were there before the flood, but they were also there after the flood. These are beings that have been with us since the beginning of time. They brought Magica down. That's when we know when we first got Magica, it was Pharmakeia, it was all the Hermetic philosophies, the Hermetic principles, even Kabbalah. Some of the Kabbalah do. A lot of this knowledge, the alchemy, metallurgy. With metallurgy, they brought us all the understanding to make swords and shields. And then we wanted power and control, which was the whole point of giving us this stuff. And then we went out and killed each other. We do that now with Alien and Crash Craft. Same entities, same playbook. They leave us a ship, and then we reverse engineer it and go out and kill each other with the technology. I mean, it's the same. If you go back into the mythology and the history, you look at Gilgamesh and Enkidu, hairy man, supernatural being, supernatural powers, could do things. Same thing. I mean, it's all the same stuff.
Yeah. Jill.
And do you, in your opinion and in your past experience, do you think that these events are amplified being in these power spots?
Oh, absolutely. Everything but the kitchen sink. It is a place that unlocks the mind and unleashes the spirits, quote unquote. That's what happens. And they're scientifically evident to you if you want to study them. You know, they are always located on a magnetic anomaly. They are always high in telluric currents. You can measure these with scientific instruments. Nowadays, you guys, even as hobbyists, have very advanced equipment. Why haven't you gotten Bigfoot undocumented evidence with all your equipment? You have to ask yourself that. You know, why does the government now go from UFO by definition to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon? Look at the definition of phenomena. They changed their definition because they know what it is, but they will never be able to explain it. These are the mysteries. Why do we call them the mysteries? They're everything but the paranormal kitchen sink in the lexicon, but we call them the mysteries because these are things that are not wired to be fully known. We will never understand them. Our science will never understand them. They are things that are not meant to be fully known.
But in the documentary, you mentioned something here about the gates and that Sasquatch is the first gate that you open, and there are many gates. Is it
Yeah,
your
thank you.
opinion now, and has it changed since you filmed, that this gate should be opened at all?
No, you don't know what you're opening it to. But in places of power, the magnetic anomaly, you know, that's a volcanic fumarole or a volcano itself that creates these things. They are places with higher than average electromagnetic frequencies. They have continuity, discontinuity edges to them where there's like a sharp drop off. You see all of our ancient mound builder structures where you talk about the red haired giants being associated, the Nephilim being associated with that after the flood, before the flood, here on the American continent, the Adena Hopewell people. These places are all built on places of power. 100% of our sacred sites are built upon places of power. They're heavy in granite, heavy in crystalline stone, heavy in gold and silver and minerals. They are always over water, underground water, fault lines. Every morning at 3 a.m., when the magnetosphere passes over the earth, it will electrify anything that will conduct. These places ramp up at 3 in the morning. Hence, everything paranormal is always a little bit more expanded at 3 a.m. Magica, we hear about witches and everybody does everything at 3 in the morning when grandma comes and appears in your bedroom, or the scary things, 3 a.m. That's because if you're in a power spot, it will put you into, and this is again a scientific aspect, an altered state. So all of our ancient sites are built upon places of power, and they also have granite altars, whether that be a blood altar or a holy altar. They were all made of granite.
Hmm.
When you alter yourself at the altar, you're going into an altered state when you're in prayer or meditation. But the altered state that affects you in these places is a very unique kind of way it affects our brain waves. It is crystal clear. You can be talking to each other. You can be, tabulating something in a physics equation, and then something will come through from the invisible, unseen realms. Something will come through and reveal itself to you because you're in the state of receptivity, which is an altered state, but it is crystal clear. You don't even know you're in an altered state. That's what they call walking in beauty in these places. So everything but the kitchen sink, you'll see UFOs, Bigfoot, fairies, elves. People come up with, it's ludicrous the things that the way this manifests,
Hmm.
but it's all the same stuff. Now, when it comes to the diabolic mythology, let's just call it demons as a catch-all term, so I don't say fallen angels all the time. They can be your best friend until they're not. They can watch you for decades, years, a whole lifetime. So they can appear as your grandmother and know all the things that your grandmother knew because they watched you. They can also appear as an alien being, extraterrestrial, the tall grays with the dome head and the big eyes. If you've ever invoked or evoked these creatures, that's what they look like. With Bigfoot, these beings can also be Bigfoot, and they can go your entire life just
Hmm.
lovely until they're not. But that's the mythology of the fallen angels and demons.
Well,
I'm
hold that
not
thought
saying
there real quick, Ira, because you're hitting on some stuff here, and I want to make sure that we put little buttons in here along the way. Jill, she's saying some stuff here along the way that are striking a chord with me here, so I'm writing this down. She's talking about what they talked about on Skinwalker Ranch and the sequel,
mm,
Paranormal Bigfoot, regarding Eric Bard talking about Barb Shoop's footage being an avatar of such. So this goes back to what Eric Bard was saying, is that he was perplexed over this image that he was seeing of a cloaking Bigfoot, because he was saying, well, maybe this is just some arbitrary phase that they're in as, like, this hybrid monkey man, and this is their true state. Ira is basically saying kind of the same thing, but she's also saying what Rick Taylor talked about here, when he saw a dead girl. He saw the spirit of a ghost in
Mhm.
proximity to a Sasquatch, and graveyards are Bigfoot hotspots. Those are probably also power spots at the same time. So, um,
I,
you're feeling this too, right, Jill?
Yeah, I mean, what it sounds like to me, and I think we get into this a little bit in the sequel, is that it's all connected.
Hmm.
It's all connected, and it's just maybe just depending on, I don't want to make this sound holistic, but whatever entity it is kind of meeting you where you are. Like I can present as a Bigfoot because
Hmm.
that's appropriate, or I can present as a spirit, or I can present as some other anomaly, a glowing light.
I think what's important to remember is it's never this or that. It's usually something very complex because our universe is both physical and metaphysical. People will say, well, I challenge you because a fallen angel can't have children. I mean, an angel cannot have children. They're non corporeal. They don't have a body. Now, I know you guys, most of you probably don't care that I'm using scripture as my evidence, but all through mythology, not just scripture, we have angelic beings becoming flesh and blood humans. They eat with Abraham, three of them. One of them's probably the pre-incarnate Christ. Another one wrestles with Jacob and injures his leg in Tobit. These, you see the angels, the three of them that went to Sodom and Gomorrah and just demolished it, blew it up. They were being followed by people that wanted to rape them, other men that wanted to rape them there. That's how it got its name. But these were flesh and blood men, but they bled into our reality, became physical, and then bled out again and disappeared. And we see
Mhm.
this all through indigenous cultures, all the mythology, as well as in scripture. I'm hyper focused on that now because of my path. So I may use that as evidence in this conversation. I'm trying to be respectful and just focus on Bigfoot,
Mhm.
but you will see with Bigfoot, he seems to come into this realm, materialize as flesh and blood. He pokes around, he eats, he does all these things that people talk about, and with the anthill or the whatever you were talking about. Um, Same thing with fallen angels and angels. When the fallen angels came down, they were able to have children with human women because they had to have been in human bodies, unless they did it
Mhm.
alchemically or they had super advanced tech like we have today, and they were like, um,
Mhm.
artificial insemination or something. I doubt it. I think they came in as humans,
Mhm.
human bodies. Now, all they had to do was manifest. You look at Bigfoot, he demanifests, he manifests. There is another similarity. Also, with these beings of mythology, light anomalies are very, very common and frequent. And in Magica, light anomalies have been in my life since I was born. When you're swimming in the preternatural, light anomalies are everywhere. And if you look at Michal Ludwig's book, very good book, by the way, I recommend it, The Orb Project. And the same thing happened to me. I was taking pictures of orbs with my cameras while I'm really trying to focus on archaeology, but all these orbs were coming up because of the higher than average electromagnetic frequencies. I had an older camera, not like the cameras we have on our cell phones, where they try to get rid of the sundogs and the orbs. This camera didn't have that. For 2 years, I'm wondering what these things are. I'm feeling the energetic fingerprint of them. I know that they're conscious. The more I become aware of them, the more they become aware of me. They're everywhere. It took me 2 years, and then I began to see them with my eyes. I still see them with my eyes. Of course, I usually send them to the foot of the cross to make sure they're not something diabolical, but the ones
Mhm.
that stay are holy, perhaps. Or maybe they're just a part of the invisible realm's ecosystem. So we know in the invisible realm, it is invisible nature. Within what I studied, I learned that within that ecosystem of invisible nature, there are things with consciousnesses as low as a moth, all the way up to a Bigfoot consciousness or a whatever, all the way up to angels and fallen angels and so
Mhm.
forth. So you have in between consciousnesses, maybe little hummingbirds like the orbs. A hummingbird in ordinary reality will come up to your face. They're very curious, they're very busy, and then they flit away. That seems to be how orbs are as well, that level of consciousness. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't divine. I don't talk to things. I
Mhm.
never was interested in divining for people. It's not something wasn't, it wasn't my thing. But,
What do you mean by
who am I?
divining? When you say divining, what do you mean you didn't do it? What do you
Well,
mean by
when,
that?
when you're divining, you're merging with an entity. Um, it's something is coming through you. You are requisite with it. It's an invocation. And then you are divining through the agency of that entity. Mediumship,
Mhm.
you're merged with something and you're speaking,
Mhm.
allowing your voice to be used for another entity. That's just a simple, bare
Mhm.
bones definition of it. But
Mhm.
I really don't have the answer for people. All I can do is say, look, in the anthology and mythology that I was taught, that I have always been aware of, the entities out there can either be good or evil, full stop, including us.
Right. you talked about your first encounter era and it having red
My
hair.
only encounter.
Well, we'll get into that because I think there might be more than you're mentioning here, but the red hair, going back through scripture, now that you're Roman Catholic, is there anything that talks about, even through as being an occultist and a shaman, what is it about the red hair? Is there a special quality to
Oh, yeah. That yeah,
where does
there's
that come from?
bloodline there's Nephilim bloodlines. There are lineages, and, many people today probably have Nephilim bloodlines. I'm just guessing. I'm just using logic and reason, to try and say this.
Mhm.
But there are many discussions of bloodlines, including my own. So, blonde red hair, blue green eyes, Black Sea, 10,000 years ago. Nobody knows where blue and green eyes came from. And all of these giants, which are Nephilim mythological creatures, they're all red hair and they're all hairy, big, giant things. That is the mythology or the anthology, however you want to look at it, of the Nephilim. They were cannibals. They were psychopathic. That doesn't always mean that's how they
Mhm.
are. Just look at a human psychopath. Um, the degrees are incredible. They go from one extreme to the other.
Mhm. Okay, let me. I want to now that we're in this ballpark of talking about redheaded giants here. We recently lost a researcher, Sonia Zohar, and a
Oh,
week
I
before
know. Oh, I
you
put a prayer up on my video for her. I was so sorry to hear that. What a beautiful woman. I'm
yeah,
so sorry. That
she
was
she
heartbreaking.
was, and she was working on researching this subject to the very end. But a week before she died, she showed me some of her research here. So I was struck. She said, I'm working on something called the Harry Mary phenomena. And I said, well, I have no idea what that is, Sonia. She goes, well, let me show you. And so I want to bring up a couple images here and get your response about this because according to Sonia's research, this is 14th century artwork from France that shows what appears to be an angelic being of some kind covered in red hair. Not only is it paintings, but there's statues of what she was claiming might be Mary, as in the Virgin Mary. Have you ever heard of these paintings? I've never seen these before. They're striking, and they show a larger than life female figure covered in hair. This one's very telling here. Um, where is this mentioned, and what's your response with this?
I don't know. That might be referring to Eve.
Okay,
I don't know. Skins of light, and then, at the fall, when Adam and Eve took of the fruit of the tree of good and evil,
right,
everything fell in vibration, and they were given skins, the first animal skins, to wear
mhm,
by God. I'm assuming that's what it is, because she was our first mother, Eve.
right,
So I see the crown. I can only assume that unless there is some other mythology I'm not aware. I'm only Catholic or Christian for 5
right.
years. I'm very young in it. And
Well,
so
could this be Lilith?
uh, I you know, I don't think it would be in the Catholic Church if it was Lilith. Nobody
Okay,
would venerate that at all. But
okay.
there might be something to do with Eve, and Mary herself is now called the new Eve. Not now, but is
Mm-hmm.
a typology in scripture as the new Eve.
Right.
Uh, and that's hotly debated between um, regular
Mm.
Christian denominations and Catholic um, faith. But I would have to ask someone like my priest or somebody, a
Yeah.
biblical scholar that would know. I don't know. I've never seen it.
So what else was striking about this too, and this kind of brings me back to some of your work that you've done, Ira, is the fact that it's down in a parabolic dish-shaped um, structure or environment or geology. And this is something that seems to come up time and time again. is this river drainage area or parabolic dish shape as being a power spot. Is that something that you found too in your research looking at power
I
spots, is that they have
I
a
think
geomanced shape?
the parabolic shaped hills are the
Mm,
conical shaped hills where the telluric currents run up them.
mhm,
So at the top, all the mythology of indigenous people, wisdom sits in high places. You look at
mm,
Christian with God on top of a mountain, Eden, you know,
mhm.
God was up on a mountain. Um, the fallen came down on Mount Hermon, the ark landed on a mountain, et
Right,
cetera, et cetera. They're parabolic shaped hills. That is a pyramid shape with the 33-degree
right.
sides. That's what that is. As for being in a ditch or in a hole, no, I have no, I had no, that was not something I observed, experienced, or was taught.
Well, I got it mixed up. It's Dr. Travis Taylor that was talking about where meteors had landed. There seemed to be more. Do you remember this
That,
conversation, Jill,
yes,
over at Phenomenon, and how
that's,
there's these parabolic dish shapes that are
that's,
seemingly conductors for power spots?
that's because of the minerals, the
Okay.
meteorites. That's
Hmm.
because of the metals that come down with them.
And so would that make a geomanced area? Why would minerals be important?
Because they're conductive.
Okay.
And when the magnetosphere passes over the earth, everywhere, anywhere you are on the earth at 3 a.m. Plus, there may also be, like in Colorado, the whole valley is an underground aquifer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like at the top of the world, and yet it's all water underground. You'll always find a holy well, mythology of that.
Right.
You'll always find underground fault lines where water passes through, volcanic tubes, water's passing through. Um, Water is conductive, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
minerals and the water, the high mineral content, the crystalline stone,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just a cup in the land. It can be at the top of a mountain.
Right.
And also the way the currents, the telluric currents run. If you want to understand energy, study water. It runs, it follows the lay of the land, yes. Perhaps in a cup,
Mm.
if it has high mineral content or
Right.
it has the other characteristics of these places. It's really what happens in these places that nobody can explain. However, if you look at the altered state occurrence and you also look at the scientific, physical characteristics and faculties, okay, great. But you still can't explain what these things are doing, because when an entity interacts with a human being, like with the footprints, and then they just disappear, we call these things dolors, where we actually have burns and evidence left on our bodies. Some people with alien abduction talk about implants that are really organic, or they seem meteoric type composition to them.
Mm-hmm.
So these things can leave physical stuff, and you're in a power spot and these physical things are happening to you. How do you explain that with science? It's impossible. And this happens to people every day. And the government knows, they track these sites, they try to
Mm-hmm.
buy them up. A lot of bases are built on them.
Jill, I have way more questions here. Do you have something loaded?
No,
Oh.
I'm a active listener.
Yeah.
Um, no, this is just all
Oh.
whenever we have our talks.
Mhm.
So we usually at least once a month we have a phone call. I feel like we check in, but it's always so informative. So I have questions that can wait till the end.
Okay. I want to
Okay,
talk.
so other comparisons you can look at is levitation,
Mhm.
UFO abductions, succubus incubus behavior with the extraterrestrials. That is classic
Mhm.
succubus incubus and alien stuff. The levitation of cattle and elk.
Mhm.
Then you wonder, well, these are craft. Well, a lot of people explain that these craft go in and out of reality, or they're ships made of light. Go back to the petroglyphs, go back to ancient mythology, go back to Renaissance art. They're showing these things all the time. They've been around since the time began. There are just so many comparisons. Bigfoot is associated with extraterrestrial stuff, or
Mm.
when we first were introduced to Bigfoot, you and I, Toby, nobody wanted to talk about orbs. Nobody wanted to talk about, I mean, they ridiculed it. Nobody wanted to talk about abduction or alien association.
Yeah, we were
Eh,
cool
eh,
before it was cool, Jill.
No, but now it's like
Yeah.
normal. I'm shocked, when you started your channel, Jill, because you're my dear friend, I wanted to watch, I wanted to support it. I love you guys. You're my friends.
Hmm.
But I couldn't believe how far it's come. Finally.
Well, that's because they got rid of the
Progress.
Twilight Zone music when they talked about UFOs, and now it's okay to talk about it because the government says so. But um, you're talking a lot about underground areas, about springs, about basically lakes of fire is what I want to talk about because Henry Franzoni, before Henry Franzoni passed, he
There's
brought
another
up
one.
two, he brought up two different things. He brought up Sasquatch basically live in the lake of fire. They live underground. That they love drumming, and if you want to contact them or evoke them, then you will drum. He said, drum the 666 beat, and there you will find Bigfoot. Can you tell us a little bit more about why Henry would have said that?
Well, did he demonstrate the 666 beat? It's that da 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 da.
Right, which
That's the
is, I've
666
heard
beat.
you drum that before.
Well, during my 4 years of core shamanism,
Yes.
which the core shamanism part is very kindergarten, but I loved the concept of the drumming because it
Hmm.
was a lot of people that you see walking around with drums. You'll see them walk and they'll go bong, and then they'll go to another tree and they'll go bong, and they have a beautifully painted, fancy Aaron Jackson fabulous drum, magical drum, bong. Well, it's the beat, 220 beats per minute, and this is fascinating. But it's not the beat. It's the vibration between the beats. That's what you focus on. That's what changes your brain waves and puts you into an altered state. That's the horse you ride. A lot of people don't know that. When you are beating a drum, you are calling everything in. If you're out in the desert and you start playing a drum properly, people are going to come over the hill in their Jeeps. They're just going to start coming in. We heard a drum. Ancient people would get on top of hills and they would drum to talk to each other, to contact each other. A
Hmm.
drum calls things in by nature, but it also calls entities in. And that's why Bigfoot comes in with drumming, or the weird owls, or the weird deer
Hmm.
that are not really owls and not really deer.
Right.
And again, that can be the diabolical. Angels don't interact with us like that. Holy things will not interact with us like that. Things of nature don't interact with us like that. They're busy doing their thing, divinely appointed in nature. Only the diabolical interact with us. I'm sorry to say that. But don't believe me, discern for yourselves. It'll take a lifetime to figure it out.
So the diabolical, that one's that's tougher for me because of the fact
I
of
know.
the fact that they have families. So explain to me how the diabolical have family units because they seem,
I can't.
the human
I can't.
quality of them,
I
that
can't.
avatar nature is the family unit an avatar to basically sucker us in, or are those family units and those lineages really happening in a temporal existence somewhere else? How does this work?
Yeah. I'll say it again. It's never this or that. I'm
Okay.
not God. I don't know what the creature known as Bigfoot is. I don't know why it does what it does. I don't know why anything does what it does. I've
Right.
just observed, I've studied, I know the mythology, the
Mm.
anthologies, the ceremonial magic. I've invoked, I've
Right.
evoked, I've gone invoked. But I can't. The mysteries are not to be fully known. I'm not saying I know evil. I know that Bigfoot is evil. I'm saying there is a good possibility that some of them are, and they can be your best friend, just like they can also impersonate your dead relative that you are heartbroken over losing, that you want to
Mhm.
interact with and ask questions of. And you
Yeah.
also look at Werner von Braun and all of these other, well, not Werner von Braun, that's a whole nother story, but you look at people that will ask the extraterrestrials, the big questions, why are you here? And then they have a message for humanity. And
Right.
the message is, well, it's all about climate change. You need to protect the planet. You go back 20 years. Well, it's all about nuclear stuff. And then you go back before that. Well, it's all
Mhm.
about, King so-and-so. It
Mhm.
it is always, this is what they do. They will impersonate whatever it is that you want to see. So
Right.
I can't say what Bigfoot is. You guys have a whole thing going on that I know nothing about.
Mhm.
I'm happy for people that if it makes them happy, and
Right.
I hope you find your answers, but I don't have them.
Well, it's always just been the journey for me. It's just endlessly fascinating, scratching at this itch. And I welcome the challenge of understanding
Yeah.
it from a new perspective.
Well, I will say this,
Mhm.
and this is about a term called obsession. It's not what you think. So within the diabolical, the stages of possession and obsession, there's a term called obsession. And it is a phenomenon known to all exorcists and all demonologists and all occultists. The entity will throw an emotion that it feels really good, and they'll throw a thought. They're called neomas. This is very well known. They'll throw this thought into you, and that thought is an obsession. You become obsessed with something where your feelings, you think they're your own thoughts and your own feelings. I have to see another UFO. And a person will go down a search where they're not focused on their children anymore. They're not focused on their family. They're not focused on their job. They're willing to give everything up. They're willing to do anything just to see it one more time. And if you ask them, what are you going to do when you see it one more time? They'll say, I don't care. I just want to see it one more time. That's a classic phenomena within the diabolical called an
Mhm.
obsession. So I have to always wonder when someone will live and die for any kind of, whether it be wealth, whether it be, some scientific thing that they're studying, I don't know, but they will fight to the death for it. And they will die, maybe in a divorce, no children, not,
Mhm.
they're on that path. And it happens also with, you know, demons and fallen angels and magic.
Mhm.
I'm not saying this is isolated to our conversation today or the people that are dealing with Bigfoot, but that is a possibility. And I have to
Mhm.
say it because I would be, you know, remiss not saying it.
Mhm. I mean, Jill, this reminds me of what I was warned about early on, which was the Bigfoot curse. And so basically, the Bigfoot curse is you're chasing shadows, and that's all you have in the end. And we've heard that story from a lot of researchers that have
It's
just kind of
mythology too. It's in all mythologies too.
sure, yeah, it's not just a
And a
Sasquatch
lot,
story at all.
and if you are a Christian, probably a lot of you are not, but if you are, you have to realize it takes you away
Hmm.
from something that is even more mystical, even more fantastical, but people don't know that. I mean, there's a whole nother world out there besides you just go to church on Sunday. There are things to study that,
Hmm.
the saints and the mystics and the
Hmm.
doctors of the church and the angelic doctors and demons and all the things that, I mean, these are like everything with the preternatural. You look at some of the government's top researchers, and they have written books. And me, as an ex-Rosicrucian, as an ex-occultist, the titles of their books, these guys were ceremonial magicians, or they had a deep knowledge of magica,
Hmm.
because they're using terms that nobody would understand
Hmm.
but someone who had studied it.
Well, this was
So
one of the big turnoffs for everyday Protestant churches for me, Eira, was the fact that they would not discuss these things unless it was from a perspective of there being tribulation coming. So therefore, put more in the offering plate. But these kind of discussions here, the things that we're discussing right now, they could never be food for thought in a typical Protestant church, not the way I was brought up. So that's not necessarily the case at all with Catholicism. You get into it, and there's very few
Well,
religions
well,
out there that tackle this.
well, the Catholic Church will tell you don't look at these things, that because most of the people, just like within the occult will say, well, you can't interact with other people. They would call them the profane. They don't understand. You can't tell them who you are because they'll come, they'll kill you or they'll come after you or whatever. The church will also say, don't look at these things. They're heretical. Well, they are heretical to the church, and it's good advice because a lot of people have no idea what's happening to them. You are dealing with things that are so intelligent. Lucifer made second in intelligence only to God. I'm not talking this close, I'm talking like that close. But second in intelligence, these are things that can think about a tree and know everything about a tree from the beginning of creation up into, present day. These are things that are so epically intelligent and their consciousnesses are so powerful they can manifest things like that. Okay, you can bend metal. Okay, you can raise the temperature of a room. Okay, you can maybe materialize or dematerialize, but not all the time. These things can think of, I need a body today, and they just manifest a body through solvent coagula and the alchemical operations because their consciousness is so strong. I see with Bigfoot, there's a little bit of superpower going on there. And I have to wonder, where is this just a creature that was given these graces, or is this something else?
Ira, I'm curious. I mean, looking back, when you were in the mystery schools, when you were studying, before you became you joined the church, was there ever any mention of the cryptids or Bigfoot, like in your, and I don't know, in the handbook, like
Yeah,
here you are.
of course there is. Of course there
These are things
is.
you could encounter. I mean, was there any sort of
Yeah.
protocol, like in the event that you conjure or, bring up a large 8-foot, hairy creature?
If you're going to invoke a chimeric creature or a therianthropic creature, an anthropomorphic creature, if you're evoking outside of the circle, you're within the circle, you're not going to touch them. You're not going to, interact with them in a physical way. Now, there are people that will loose things, but they're only here temporarily. If someone is powerful enough, according to the mythology, you don't have to believe anything I say, but according to the mythology, if someone creates a being, for example, a homunculus, tiny human, which in alchemy there are legends and mythologies of that. If something is created and it's loosed, whether to go after another person or to just be loosened, they can't maintain that for very long. So that's why you see going in and out of reality. It's an apport, it comes in. I don't know. I think I talked to you about apports in the past. The succubus incubus documentation will show that there is a goo left on people. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's black, and they can't get it off. Sometimes it's a powder, sometimes it's a sticky substance, and people report this and they tell the exorcist this, they tell their priest this, and then simply a day or two later it just dematerializes and disappears. You see this with Bigfoot, with the powder and the things that you've asked me about. There are too many commonalities. Now, again, I can't say evil Bigfoot, good Bigfoot. But, what I do know is it's an entity, and holy entities, they don't interact with us. That's all I can say.
No,
It's
say that
rare.
again. Holy entities don't interact with us?
No, it's something that goes against God's will. They are not to leave their estate. They are not to interact with us. if everything is just angels and fallen angels, I can look at the church tradition and doctrine, and it's hard for me to say because some of the people that are familiar with me are going to wonder, don't cave, don't cave. But I don't have those answers. I
Hmm.
don't know. Is there something that's like us, in between? But why
Right.
were we not given these graces as well? Or why did we not? It's such a volatile subject.
Hmm.
I have my own absolute beliefs, but I also don't want to offend people that I've never even met and will never meet and don't know that, are claiming to have really great experiences. Who am I? I'm nobody.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you my story. It's just a story to you. You have to discern for yourselves, and that's between you and God, if that's what the conversation we're going to have. But usually you don't have those two conversations, Bigfoot and God, at the same
Mhm.
time. It never happens.
So I have to bring up the albivernix, which is the waxy sebum that you're talking about. Um, there's an episode on Johnny Carson with Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd's lineage goes back to the spiritualist movement. He has some really interesting grandparents. That's how Ghostbusters came about, is through the mind of Dan Aykroyd writing the screenplay, I believe.
Yeah.
And he's on Johnny Carson circa 1970s talking about just what you spoke about, Ira. He didn't call it albivernix, which is this waxy, chalky sebum that we find in latent Sasquatch handprints and face prints. And I want to talk to you about the lip impression that was found circa, when you were up here in the Northwest. You had something appear in
Yeah.
between the storm glass of your bedroom, which was at least over 7 feet, maybe taller, much taller, right?
Yeah.
Appear on your glass window. Can you describe what happened?
It just was there and it wouldn't come up. And then after a while, I think you asked me, "Can you take another picture of it?" And I was like, "Well, I can't see it now." But it looked
W-
just like a lip print on the window. I
Yeah,
can't
and
explain
I
it.
don't know if you
I
saw this, Jill, but they were lips about twice the size of McJagger's, and they had a little bit of nostril flare, and they
Yeah.
were in the middle of the window from the, I don't know if it was in the outside or between the panes of glass. I thought it was between the storm windows, which would
Mhm.
mean that it's transmedium, right? If it came between the glass and left the impression, it would be harder to scrub that off. But that was better part of
Yeah.
15 feet up off the air. I will just say that you are in a hotspot area, very well known to Bigfoot researchers.
I had just become Catholic. I was still waiting to be confirmed Catholic. And I was under huge spiritual attack. So a lot of the activity at my house, are
Mm.
you going to attribute that to Bigfoot? Animal kills, a whole flock of birds smashing into the window and dying, all the knocking, all of
Right.
the appliances blowing up. We can cherry pick and say, well, this looks like Bigfoot. I don't know. I wish it was Bigfoot.
Hmm. But
At
you
that
did have
time,
Bigfoot stuff happen around your house, didn't you?
I don't know if it was Bigfoot. I didn't see the
Hmm.
Bigfoot. How I don't know. I've dealt with so many entities. And that
Right.
was the time I was becoming Christian. I would love to tell you what you want to hear. I just don't know. I
No,
don't
it
know.
just reminded me
And
about
that's a
what
safe
we'd seen
answer.
before.
I think that's a safe answer because a
Mm.
lot of people would just jump and say, "Well,
Yeah.
I heard what sounded like a branch breaking. It has to be Bigfoot." A
Right.
lot of people are reaching.
Oh, I've had so many experiences that you could attribute to it. But
Hmm.
before I was Christian, I'd have voices calling in the Gifford Pinto National Forest when I lived in the Columbia Gorge. I remember one day I was just sobbing my eyes out and I went across this big creek and I sat in the meadow across from my house. And it was right on the edge of the national forest. And I was crying my eyes out and it was straight up and down cliffs. And I remember hearing way up in the foliage a little voice going, "Come, come see, come see." And I'm crying my eyes out with my two dogs next to me. And
Hmm.
I realized that's how I would call my dogs. I would always go, "Come, come see." Now here I am crying, and something is up really high in this straight up and down, heavily foliage, rainforest, granite cliff side hill, saying as clear as a bell, come, come see. Was it a Bigfoot? I don't know. Maybe it was a raven. I don't know. Maybe it was a 3-year-old child that crawled all the way up that hill. I don't know.
Probably, Eira.
That's
Probably what it was.
That was airlifted by special forces. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but I heard it. My dogs heard it. I have seen things that are absolutely ludicrous. The orb that was as big as a car with a skin of an elephant floating up those rock walls, floating up those heavily geomassed walls that have had really high readings of telluric currents running through them. And here's this thing just floating up and it just disappears. My dog saw it. I saw it. It was an egg-shaped. It's ludicrous. I tell these stories and I think, well, I've told so many now, who cares what people think about me? But they also didn't know my past. They just saw me as this nice girl that took hikes in the forest for, I just sort of came out of nowhere in 2015 and did those 2 talks on places of power. But it's all the kitchen sink. It's the entire paranormal lexicon. Bigfoot is just one of the mysteries of thousands of creatures and entities and phenomena. It's just one more.
So you have some books out, Eira. I want you to talk a little bit about how people get in touch with you to research what you're researching. You have a fantastic YouTube channel, EiraWulfnothsson.com. Pitbulls of the Lord is your YouTube channel, but you're also an author of 2 different books. Why don't you tell people about those books?
My channel is a Catholic Christian channel, so you're not going to be hearing about a lot of stuff. It really speaks to the paranormal from fallen angel, demons. So I don't know how many of you would be comfortable with that. You would probably hear things you don't want to hear. But my website is EiraWulfnothsson.com. My book is From Occultist to Christian, The Devil's Mistake. My other book is Dominicanus, You, Your Dog, and Heaven. It's about how all animals do go to heaven. There is scripture that reflects that. And my experiences with my dogs and how our dogs are very, very special and supernatural, really. I mean, my dogs were the first creatures to teach me about unconditional love. And really, they are examples of how God is in unconditionally loving us. They love us when we're rich or poor, fat or skinny, beautiful or ugly. They even love us when we don't love them, and they would die for us like God. So there's a little hat tip from God. When we look at the natural world and the creatures in it, we can see God.
All right. Thank you for spending the evening with us and staying up to do this, Eira.
No, it's fun. It was always fun. I watch your program. It's my guilty pleasure. And
Well, if we can be
sometimes,
one
when I see you and Toby, and it always makes me laugh and gives me a smile. So thanks for being who you guys are.
Good. Glad you like it.
All right.
Don't
Talk to you later.
tell anybody. Okay.
Thank you, Eira.
Much love to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Resonance Production podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can email us at bigfootrevealedpod@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for weekly podcasts coming up in the future. If you're just discovering the Flash of Beauty universe, you can watch our documentaries on most streaming platforms.